So is reading a good way to learn Spanish? If you don't know me, my name is Hamid, I'm 15 years old, and I started learning Spanish when I was around 13 years old. And I got fluent in about 120 hours of studying, which is really quick compared to 600 hours of studying, which is like the regular speed that someone gets fluent in Spanish. This is how I sounded before.
Hola, estoy comiendo comida. Voy a mejorar mi español.
Y ahora puedo hablar con fluidez y ahora puedo tener conversaciones con los activos. Creo que tengo un acento buen desarrollado, creo. Y sí, en este video te voy a explicar si leer funciona para aprender el español. A lot of people try learning Spanish by reading through it. So I saw these YouTube videos when I was starting to learn Spanish, at least. I saw a bunch of these videos where they would explain sort of, in order to get fluent in Spanish, you have to develop the 4 or 5 aspects of language, being speaking, listening, reading, and vocabulary. You've probably seen these, but they're very viral videos. And so the way to get better at the reading part is just to read. And people recommend it for vocabulary as well, to get a better vocabulary, to understand the language better. For example, way before I even started learning Spanish, I was born and raised in Sweden, but my family and my ethnicity is completely Azeri, which is like Turkish. And my dad just wanted me to sort of read Azeri books to get better at Azeri. And what I would do is I would read through it, and when I didn't know a word, I would like make a vocabulary list and write it down, and then I would have that list to sort of memorize. And if I don't know a word, I'd write it down, then memorize it, then I'd know the word. And guess what? I literally remember none of the words. I don't know any of the words. It barely helped me. And even in Sweden, since Swedish is technically my third language, even though it's like in my native language, one way, like one time on a test, I got when we had a Swedish test, it didn't go that well. And one of the things that the teacher recommended us was to literally just to read through a test and then write down, rewrite the text. That's literally it. You would read a text, you would read whatever text it was, and then you just have to copy it onto another piece of paper. And so to answer the question, is reading a good way to learn Spanish or any language? And the simple answer is just no, not at all. It's not a good way at all to learn the language, unless your goal is to specifically get better at reading. Because you never, or most probably if you're watching these videos, you probably don't actually care about reading in Spanish, right? No, you care about being able to walk into a grocery store and then there's a person in line that can't speak English but speaks Spanish, and you want to be able to translate that, have a conversation with them. One of your neighbors is from Spain and you want to be able to talk to him only in Spanish. Do you mean? At least that's what my goal was. And I've actually literally have that exact same situation. I had a Spanish neighbor, or he was a neighbor from Spain, and I just speak to him in Spanish every time I see him, and it's very pleasant. And so to get there, firstly, I never even used reading as a method to get fluent in Spanish. And the reason is because we're not learning Spanish to be able to read it. Do you know what I mean? Maybe that's like a side quest. Do you know what I mean? Okay, if I'm texting in Spanish, I want to be able to understand that at least. But the main juice of the language, the main the thing that you get out of the language is not the book you're gonna be able to read. Do you mean no one's impressed by you being able to read a book? Everyone's impressed by you being able to speak and have a fluent conversation with a good accent in Spanish. And so if you want to get better at speaking Spanish and having conversations in Spanish, why would you read, right? It just doesn't make sense. It doesn't at least from what I've seen, at least, the people that recommend that are the same people that say it's impossible to get fluent in Spanish in a month. Or the people that say that are the same people that memorize it and think that Duolingo is an actual good app. Do you know what I mean? It's unless you really want to get real good at reading in Spanish, reading Spanish text just doesn't work. Especially this method of reading until you don't know a word and then writing it and then memorizing it. It's essentially what I did to learn Spanish. The same sort of framework, except applied to reading. The way I got fluent, the simplest way, is the same way that we got fluent when we were kids. I would watch native Spanish content, or I would listen to, native speaking, and when I didn't know a word or anything, I would translate it and then go back to the video. I wouldn't write it down and memorize it, because memorizing doesn't work. And so I did that along with obviously understanding Spanish grammar and stuff, and I got fluent in about 120 hours of studying. Now it's taking what I did, which was watching it, and when I didn't understand a word, translating and finding out. It's that, except you read, and then when you don't know a word, you memorize it. It's just a worse version. It's every single benefit you get from my method is just stripped away, except for maybe vocabulary, but even so, you're memorizing. It's just like the two worst methods of learning put together. You're not picking up a native accent because you're not listening to a native accent. You're reading it in your own gringo accent. You're reading it like, me gusta hablar en español, he estado hablando español por mucho tiempo. That's how you're reading it, which means you're not getting like native Spanish input. The vocabulary is probably fried because most books are about a certain niche, a certain topic, which means you're gonna learn a word like pterodactyl before you learn the word to do. And even that, like, you won't even understand how the word hacer works because all you're doing is just memorizing the different forms of it. Do you know what I mean? It's just extremely ineffective if you're trying to actually get fluent in Spanish. So you don't get to listen to a native accent, you don't get to speak a native accent, you don't get like native vocabulary, you don't understand like the tone of Spanish, how the speed of Spanish, because you could read as slow as you want. But because real Spanish is like, that's how Spanish is. It's disgustingly fast. It's hard to understand because it's so quick. And so if you're reading, how are you emulating that? There's a simple, like, I don't know, this is the most simplest explanation I can give you. If you want to get better at something, you have to do that thing. Like, if you want to get better at pull-ups, are you going to do a bench press or are you going to do more pull-ups? Right? Like, it seems obvious, right? If you're going to get better at push-ups, do you want to do decline bench press or are you going to just do more push-ups? More push-ups, right? If you want to get better at giving movements in the gym, you have to do that movement in the gym. Right? Like, do you know what I mean? If you want to get better at a certain thing in Spanish, aka speaking and having conversations, you have to speak and have conversations. So to summarize this video, a very short video, is reading a good way to get fluent in Spanish or to learn Spanish? No. At face value, no. Because you want to get fluent in Spanish. You want to be able to speak fluently with fluidity. Unless you want to get good at reading in Spanish, don't read in Spanish to get fluent because you are wasting your time. The words and vocabulary you're learning are not like in context in terms of native speech. They're not said by natives. They're not spoken as fast as natives do. Most likely, if you're reading like a beginner book, it's even worse because now you're learning how to read Spanish like a kid. And if you want to get better at speaking like an adult in Spanish, you have to start speaking and learning like an adult in Spanish, not like a kid. It's a very simple thing. If you want to get better at something, you have to do that thing. So if you don't want to get better at reading in Spanish, but you want to get better at speaking and having conversations, then reading is useless in Spanish. If you're interested in getting my Spanish course and in one-on-one coaching, then check the description, and I hope this video helped you, bro, and stay humble.